Hi, and welcome to the Wise Heart Wellness Scientist Sage Sangha. My name's Nancy Anderson Dolan, and I'm so happy to welcome you here today. And we're discussing an interesting topic tonight called belonging. And the idea of belonging um, comes up in our lives all the time, constantly, moment to moment, day to day, but we don't really separate it and think about it on its own. And an American psychologist, Maslow, put belonging right after the basics of, physiological needs like water and sleep and and safety. And right after that, we have this absolute longing for belonging. It's an innate need. And so it's really, really important in our well-being and our survival and all sorts of things. And some other cultures, other than like the American view of the psychologist, they start from belonging to the earth and that being the first necessary need. And that idea, I love the way that Tara Brach puts it. She talks about earthling is our first affiliation. We are earthlings. And that belonging, it's deeper than the external connections. We need all sorts of connections, but it's much deeper than that. So the earth part sort of brings us to that understanding. And when we're disconnected from our original nature, our natural environment, we create damage and we damage ourselves and the planet. And you'll see as we go along here that any kind of severed belonging creates damage. The shamans often do what they call creation journey. And a creation journey is where people go and ask to be shown their arrival to the planet. So back beyond when they were actually born, but what happened on their way to being born on the earth. And often people are so overwhelmed by what they experience. They experience this joy and support and belonging and purposefulness and enthusiasm. And that experience of the transition of birth often cements a feeling of true belonging to life, where people don't feel like we just got here and got to figure everything out, that we belong here. We belong in the life we're living. And we don't have a lot of that in our current culture. And the world really needs this greater idea of belonging right now, because that we don't go with the seasons of the cycles. We don't belong to each other very well. And we don't get that reverence of what belonging means. And earlier spiritual things came out of that belonging to the earth. And there were other things like the sun worshiping and that sort of thing. And we really do belong to the earth in those cycles. But the other parts, the later spiritual traditions, they introduced different ways of belonging, from gods to religious sects to even just the group of people that were awakening, as like in Buddhism. And all of those, even with all that diversity, it still held a lot of belonging, but it also held some divisiveness, where it was not just this is good for me and this is what I am and this is where I belong, but that other people should think this way too, or other people shouldn't belong in this group. So divisiveness started coming into this spiritual belonging, which is still a big thing for a lot of people on the planet. The majority of people, I would even say, have some sort of spiritual affiliation or belonging, sense of belonging. Now, the next one is quite different than a lot of people talk about as well, but belonging to ourselves is this crucial part of true belonging. If I don't feel at home with myself, occupying the life that I'm living, I struggle to have belonging. And so this idea of belonging to ourselves, we're gonna talk a lot more about that, because there's many paths to belonging, as we've been seeing, the earth, spirituality, but belonging with ourselves, that presence. And when we disconnect from ourselves, we really experience severed belonging and we do damage. And it could be things like not taking care of our needs, not paying attention to our intuitions, all sorts of things like that. And so this idea about there's lots of things that severed belonging happens from, but we experience severed belonging to ourselves when those things are left unseen or unexpressed or unprocessed, we might say. And that proves true whether it's because of intentional harm or abuse or situational trauma, like losing a parent or having, for some reason, to leave a situation that you had deep ties in. And separate belonging could even be considered an illness, a physical, mental, social, spiritual illness. So if we think about severed belonging as an illness, we think about ways to help it, to treat it, to heal it. And many Caucasian societies, particularly, but others as well, have a more individual, not group healing, not group living, but that individual first ownership or dominion over things like that. And that often that belonging means belonging to specific groups that have some sort of function. And often it's tied to things like prestige or safety or privilege. But it can also be like-minded community, functionality. But it's when the divisiveness comes up is when there is a focus on how others are different, not like there might be a group that's helping people that have had heart attacks. They don't discriminate against the people that have had strokes, where other groups sometimes do, based on race or financial standing or things like that. And, often, even as divisive as those things can be, our own personal sort of egoic eccentricities can create severed or false belonging. Because the idea of acceptance is central to belonging, but the acceptance part can be sort of distorted or deformed. So we're kind of people pleasing to be accepted, or we are thinking about how am I doing? How am I evaluating myself? What are the standards? Am I meeting the standards? And that might be like in North American culture for beauty or wealth or, fitness or, the ability to orate well, all sorts of things. And so we can move out of our own belonging by evaluating ourselves like that all the time. And maybe that other people are doing it, but we also take it up inside. Moving away from those sort of egoic standards of things can really help us move from that external referencing into internal referencing. And that's where we actually feel belonging, is inside. And there's a number of things that help us feel that belonging, but there's a number of things that we take up that prevent us as well, because we might want to belong in comfortable circles of people, and that can be ego driven to just feel good about ourselves. I can remember in high school I really wanted to be with the athletes, and I wasn't a very good athlete, so that didn't work out that well for me, because even when I managed to get there, I didn't feel like I belonged anyway. And so those kinds of things take us away from feeling just our innate goodness and our belonging and our organically trusting who we are by trying to fit in with these other kinds of groups and belong to them. That they may not be part of what we are, or we may go and belong to them, but we feel so different that we sabotage our own belonging. There's lots of people that are not particularly good at sports, playing high school sports, and they're perfectly accepted on the teams. But that doesn't change if I have the internal evaluation and make myself separate from those other people that I perceive to be better than me. And so those are kinds of like things where we deflate ourselves, judging and blaming, and that cuts off connection. And the other side is inflating, where we fuel the sort of special person thing. And all of my life, I wanted to be special. And I ended up being special in ways that I wasn't really pleased about. And that didn't work out that well for me either. My neurodiverse brain made me very special, but didn't work out for me in a lot of ways. But that idea of, I want to be special, and I want that separated me from other people. I didn't get to be connected with them in the way that I would like to. And the more that we do it, we control things and manipulate what people think about us, we get more afraid of them finding out. This sort of imposter syndrome experience. And we don't like ourselves as much. We get that, what they call the trance of unworthiness keeps coming up. And that's a big part about belonging, this trance of unworthiness. And we might not call it that on the surface, but when we really get down to not belonging, there is some issues of worth going on there. And the other part that I find a lot of people in therapy struggle with is that they want particular places or people to accept them unequivocally. And often they are people in places that are not built or able to do that. And so we experience severed belonging when we are trying to belong to those places and people that are not built for that have some of their own issues that separate them from us. But we take it on as our separation, our severed belonging. So there's a lot of things that move through that. When we don't feel good about ourselves, we feel like we don't belong. And then we're on the outlook for how we don't belong. And I'm just going to read something from Brene Brown because it was just so perfectly described. And she says, stop walking through the world looking for confirmation you don't belong. You will always find it because you've made that your mission. Stop scouring people's faces for evidence that you are not enough. You will always find it because you've made that your goal. True belonging and self-worth are not goods. We don't negotiate their value in the world. The truth about who we are lives in our hearts. Our call to courage is to protect our wild heart against constant evaluation. And no one belongs here more than you. I really, really love that. Because the idea of evaluation is probably the biggest knife that cuts off belonging. And Mother Teresa talked a lot about true connections are the vital threads of belonging. And so if I am evaluating myself and perhaps evaluating other people because that's how I see the world, then it's really hard to have those true connections. And for a lot of my life, I would hang around with people and I felt like it was, any minute something's going to fall apart. And those people will find out who I am and not want to hang out with me anymore. And what I came to understand is a lot of those people were thinking that too. And when I talked to people who could openly talk about that sort of thing, it was amazing to me because I'm like, oh my God, we actually do belong together because we are all thinking we don't belong. How great is this? And it really is interesting because I talk about it more in more situations now, and I talk more openly about myself and my experience. And often I do find that people are belonging on that level. But that kind of belonging requires a lot of vulnerability. And I wasn't willing to do that for a long time in my life. I wasn't strong enough or centered enough in myself to do that either. And that the presence that it takes to just be present with people in ongoing relationships, it's not easy. And they may not always behave the way that we like, or they may not always believe the way that we like. And so that presence and vulnerability to continue to that. And often for me, it was because they would trigger something and it would be put me into that fight or flight mode, down into the reptile brain. And the reptile brain does not foster intimacy or belonging because it doesn't see the world as a friendly place. And belonging needs to have a vision of the universe as a friendly place so that we can not live devoted to safety. The reptile brain lives trying to build safety and protection. And what we want to do is build understanding and connection. And it's really hard to put both those together at the same time. If I believe the world isn't safe, I don't want to build connection because it's threatening. So this idea of belonging, John O'Donohue says that life's journey is a task of refining our belonging so that it may become more true and free. And I love that as a process. Belonging is a process, not a static thing. And I really had trouble with that in my life because I would have friends that would come and go out of my life. And that was not okay for me because it's like, if you belong, you belong. And this is a life pact. And that, of course, isn't true, doesn't work. But as people can be present, or as I was present with myself, I really had the sense that I belonged to something bigger. And my spiritual belonging, as it came along, I could see that this was part of the life path, that part of that life journey. But we want to know that this is not a static thing. And we want to realize that process of realizing our interconnection and moving into revering it and holding it precious to us. And so that we are willing to put some effort and work and risk vulnerability in it. And accept that severed belonging is a part of the human condition. But there are lots of paths to belonging in so many ways. Paths with our pets, paths with our families, paths with our friends, and paths with people that maybe we're involved in, a crisis with, or a something that we're trying to do, like some sort of activism or job that we come together to do, and we build relationships in that work. So there's lots of ways to go towards belonging, but remember, it's about the vulnerability and willing to be connecting and being discerning is the word I'm going to use. Being discerning, because if I end up in that situation where I want to belong with people who are either not able, not interested, or actually against some way about who I am, then I'm not going to experience belonging with these people, no matter how present I am. But the presence helps us navigate and move away from things that wouldn't be useful. So this idea that if we are suffering in separation, that we don't isolate further. And that is often, even like a dog that's got a sore leg will try and hide under a porch. And so we really got to pay attention that our suffering can be that actual isolation, moving away, and think and bring our hearts to this place of being willing to open up so that we can have reconnection. That our well-being wants that belonging, and we're hardwired to want it. And so if we try and thwart it, it can be very challenging. And I am sure that there are some people in the world that are built for less interaction, but they have an innate sense of belonging already. And it may be belonging to something bigger than them, or a purpose that they're involved in that has them not so connected to other people. So it isn't that we are not wanting it, or that everybody has to have it in the same way, because it's certainly not true. Many, many things in our society makes it harder. We talked about some basic things earlier, like trauma and those things, but there are some other things, and we might call them belonging substitutes. And so rather than have belonging, we have these substitutes, and sometimes they're actually substances or behaviors or polite conversation. And often you can find this with people, and you feel like they want to get away from you. but they're engaging you, and it can feel a little bit odd. Or they're in a situation, maybe at work or even family members, a part of a bigger group, that they want to belong, but they don't know how. And often, like I say, we can feel those things. We can feel those things. And so we want to not get hooked on our belonging substitutes, just, filling our time with group after group after group of people, and not move away from things that are or not move towards things that are negative belonging, you might say, like gangs or conspiracy theory groups or things like that. That's false belonging. And that they can actually feel very, very bonded, but it doesn't give them the peace and openness and flow that you get when you get true deep belonging. It's not the same experience. It's belonging that's created from that lizard brain, not your heart. And these are very different kinds of feelings. And some cultures even have an idea that we heal as a group. As when we pray together, we help everybody, not just the people we're praying for. When we work together, we help everybody, not just the people that we're working with. And others are more disjointed, less united. And we believe that the suffering is mine and mine alone, so I isolate, or theirs and theirs alone. And I don't want to get too close to it because I don't want to get pulled into it. And those kinds of things, like climate change and violence and hunger, that need cooperative work from a group of people that feel that these issues belong in their life as well. Those are the kinds of things that we need to deal with. And even we're going to look at some others that are a little other barriers that are a little harder to consider. One of them is compulsive calming. And you would think that calming would be a good idea to get belonging from. But if I am nervous around people, so I do not go around people, or if I only can allow people that never do anything that make me feel uncomfortable, I'm going to have more trouble with that. And compulsive calming often takes us out of our beingness, and people may use drugs or food or escapes of other kinds. And people can go to a bar and have a feeling of belonging for the night, but often the substances they're ingesting keep them from belonging deeply through their heart connections. All sorts of things like that. Now, the other things we do to ourselves, we have self-aversion, and we really want to put ourselves down, and we think it's or we have unrealistic expectations or fixating on our imperfections, those kinds of things. We don't relax and open to whatever is there. So I'm going to give you a mantra to work for that it's not my fault. It's not my fault that I lapse into severed belonging. I can heal and I can grow, and I am not alone. I can't possibly be alone on this planet. There's trees, there's people, there's pets, and others feel this. Others feel this severed belonging. But belonging is central to my well-being and to others. So when I reach out to another, I am reaching out for their well-being as well. So that is a quick rundown of the different kinds of belonging. And we're just going to do a few minutes here of some questioning, some contemplation. So get comfortable if you wish to. And just notice these are check-ins that Tara Brach suggests. So just notice like how many times in a day that you might have been doing things to just feel better or feel better about yourself. And this could be anything from trying to manage somebody's opinion of you or soothe your body. Or you might be talking to yourself. And it may be, oh, it doesn't matter that they didn't phone. I don't really like them anyway. Or it might be talking to yourself in ways like, you're better than they are. Those kinds of ways. But you might identify positive ways too, that you are reinforcing belonging and reminding yourself that you do belong. You might think of a friend and just reach out or say a silent prayer. And this does make you feel better about yourself and with yourself. So those things can have negative or positive influences. But it's also useful to scan for what might be between me and feeling good about myself. And it might be a thought. And you might ask to be guided to information that is standing between you and feeling your belonging. And you might find that it is your judgment of yourself, or one of those narratives that exist in the world that you've picked up. Or it might be as simple as not feeling rested. You might have a filter that filters all that you do through, yeah, I did this, but other people do it better, or I could have done more. Those kind of filters can definitely create that severed belonging. Mhm. And the last one is, where am I open to belonging? Where am I open to connection? And that might be on a spiritual basis, or it might be that I'll just walk down the street or walk into work thinking, I'm going to be open to belonging and see where it might come up. The opposite of what Brene Brown was telling us, all the places where we look for where we don't belong. So just hold in your mind that idea where I might find belonging, whether that's in my heart or outside myself, or just in my ideas about the world. Mhm. Okay, so the people that are with me live, feel free to continue contemplating. And I'm going to say goodnight to those of you that are watching this at a later time. And thank you very much for joining us. And you can always send us questions, contributions, and comments to scientistsage@gmail.com. And anything you would like to have discussed in this forum, please feel free to send that there as well. I am with you. You are with me. Blessed be. Good night.